Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Jess Jorgensen from Sporesight to Spore Journeys. Jess has a background in futures thinking and applying mycelial and fungal principles to her discipline, and she's recently published a manifesto of sorts where she's pulled together years of research into fungi as your futurist, a playbook with lots of ideas and resources to help people apply and play with these principles. And we've interacted a fair bit, or three of us with Jess, online and in person. So it's been a bit of a journey up to this point already. And so yeah, this podcast is a bit of a culmination of that journey, and we'll dive a bit deeper into the work that she's done. Um, Jess is in a very similar space to us, where it's not so much about mushrooms and fungi as food or functional or for other purposes, but it's more like learning from them and applying the principles of mycelia and fungi and how we do that, where we've done that more working with individuals, and Jess has brought it into working with organizations and even large corporations to help them think in a regenerative way. So, Jess, you describe yourself as a foresight strategist inspired by fungi. For those who might be new to this, what does that actually mean in your own words?
Well, hi Milan. Thank you so much to you and Mycelium Hub for having me. Um, as you know, I love to chat about fungi, geek out about fungi. So yeah, been looking forward to chatting today. A foresight strategist inspired by fungi. So um, I have recently come out of a 2-decade career working as a foresight strategist and insight researcher. Essentially, what that means is I was spending a lot of time working either within consulting agencies or within corporations on strategic insights and foresight, helping businesses and organizations to understand what's going on in culture, what's going on with people and society, and in our categories, um, in order to essentially sell more stuff, whether that be a brand or a product, or a program, um, either to sell things or to develop programs and initiatives within the realm of public health, for example. The sort of applications of foresight and strategic thinking are quite broad. Um, so I spent, I don't want to go too much into that career because I think we'll talk about a little bit about leaving it to essentially start something like Sporesight. But so what the inspired by fungi part of your question is how I've transitioned the skills and experience that I developed over that career, and I'm now essentially trying to apply them in a different space and in a different way and for a different purpose. Fungi has inspired me in many, many, many ways. And I hope through Sporesight to be able to bring this inspiration to other people in their work and how they think, how they work, and how they design things.
And that's really interesting. So that you had this encounter and an inspiration. It really sparked something in you, and I know from the time that we spent in person that you're actually a bit of a mushroom nerd as well, if I can say that. Like really getting into the forest and figuring out what they all are.
Mm.
What first drew you to fungi as teachers, not just as organisms, but as a way of seeing and designing the world differently?
I think there was a moment on a world mushroom tour that I'm currently on, which we can talk about more in a moment. But there was a moment where I realized how mycelium works. And the word, I'm sure you've had this, but the word mycelium just kind of sits in your gut and goes, moo, what is that? It's like this magical, mystical thing, and it's really cool. And when I actually realized how mycelium interacts with its environment, I was hooked. And I was like, right, now I understand biologically and from a biological, ecological and kind of like strategic perspective, I now understand something that I knew as a kid or as a teenager, but was never able to articulate. And that was the moment where I sort of realized that just from a thinking perspective, we could really learn from nature and from fungi and apply this type of this way of being in how we exist with the world. The longer answer to your question is that as a kid, I was very lucky to grow up in the mountains outside Cape Town in South Africa. I'm sort of British South African and have always had two families and two lives and lived between, Europe and Southern Africa. But being in the mountains every day, surrounded by forests and fynbos and like a feral horse. um, I mean, you've met mushrooms in the woods? You live in the woods. You see every day how they exist with fauna and flora and fungi. And for me as a kid, this is going to sound, this may sound funny or weird, and I'm okay with that. But, fungi were often better friends to me than humans were. Um, and I could never quite understand how humans were so prone to destroying our home, our earthly home, where fungi and flora and fauna did not. They sort of just existed and carried on. And as a kid, I never quite understood the sort of cycle of life beyond what like Mufasa tells Simba in The Lion King. Um, but as an adult and now understanding and researching fungi in more depth, I now understand what it means. And I think as humans, there's so much we can learn. I'm just so inspired to learn from fungi and how it interacts with the environment and how we can apply that to the way that we are, the way that we think, the way that we work, the way that we design. So, yeah.
So they've been part of your life for quite some time, and yeah, I see that they started teaching you even in your youth. For myself, I've discovered them fairly late in life, perhaps only over the last few years, perhaps since coming to Sweden. But I can relate to that, and like seeing how they are, how they develop, how they pop up seemingly overnight sometimes, and then the whole cycle of life, right? And then they're in certain places, and you come back next year, and they come back um, every time. For me, one of the big things about that was also this kind of getting lost in nature, um, looking for mushrooms, and then this kind of childlike joy when discovering some, uh, not just edible ones, but also ones that are like new or different, or that look strange, or that are brightly colored. And it's a discovery. It's like, wow, this wasn't here last time. And
Oh, Italy. It's like a huge, it's like a massive treasure hunt that never ends because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of species. So you just, and and I'm so glad you brought that up, Milan, because that's what happened on my mushroom tour. Essentially in 2023, for the listeners who are like, what is she talking about? This mushroom tour thing. In 2023, I finally found the courage and also I'd managed to save enough working overtime to kind of take a few months off and firstly take a rest from my career and also then to start exploring. And there was no real intention in the beginning, but I just started exploring mushrooms. Um, and I started, beyond foraging and trying to find mushrooms in my environment and in the natural world, I was also wanting to connect with people who were working with mushrooms in some way. So I started in Thailand, Vietnam, and one interview with a person growing mushrooms or cultivating or innovating with them in some way, working with fungi or mycelium as a material, working in microremediation, with psilocybin, um, as a psychedelic assisted therapy. Just like one interview after the next led to the next, and I ended up in Kenya and in Uganda and in South Africa and in the UK and all over Europe and back to East Africa and back to South Africa, and it's been incredible. And since then, just like foraging is a treasure hunt, and you get so excited every time you see, like, oh my gosh, there's the same chicken of the woods that I saw last year and it's popped up in the same spot. But here's a very weird thing that I've never seen before and didn't realize was even a mushroom. It looks like a squirrel, but it's a mushroom. They're just like so magical. And whether I'm exploring them in the forest for foraging or on a mushroom tour exploring how fungi are impacting our futures and the ways that people are thinking about them and working with them, you just can't stop. It's a bit of a thread that just keeps on pulling. And I love it because I think fungi, the universe of fungi is huge. The kingdom or queendom or queerdom of fungi is massive. It's vast. And we know less about it than we know about the deep sea. And we know less about the deep sea than we do the moon. Or is it the other way around? I think we know less about the moon than the deep sea. Either way, we know less about fungi than either of those things, which is so exciting because those of us who are excited by fungi, I think that it's just this vast universe that we're only just beginning to understand.
Thanks for sharing a bit more about your journey there. And I want to zoom in on that a little bit. When you had you have a career as a foresight strategist, and there came a turning point where you brought the fungal world into that and turned your work into, you evolved your approach, you evolved your perspective, and you integrated these fungal principles. What was it that really kicked that off? What was the spark there for you?
Hmm. What sparked it? Good question. Um, well, I think I'm going to take a step back and talk about um, two things that sparked this transition before we can talk about sort of integrating fungal principles into the work. Is that okay? Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. So the transition was sparked by a push from the present and a pull from the future. And in futures thinking, we often talk about forces of change or drivers of change. My push from the present was finding myself in a, um, I would say it's, a good career, depending on how one defines good. I work with fantastic people and I've worked with some incredible agencies and corporations, and I'm very proud of that, and privileged as well to have had such a great time. Um, and But it wasn't quite that, it just felt like there was something missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Um, I was also burnt out. I was working, you know, too hard, too many hours, probably not as efficiently as I could, and probably, stuck in a sort of the the corporate machine that sort of grinds and churns you and squeezes every last ounce out of your brain and your energy until you realize, like, hey, this isn't actually sustainable. And not only is it unsustainable, but it's just not regenerative. There is no value that I feel as if I'm creating for people, for humans, for the planet, for our more than human kin, which we'll talk about more in a second. And I just couldn't see how this work that I was doing was contributing to a future that was regenerative for any of the stakeholders in my life, including my fauna, flora, and fungi friends. And So this is one of the reasons I wanted to sort of move away from this career. And it was actually a decision that I made many years ago, but it took a very long time for it to come to fruition for a number of reasons, external and internal factors, financial, etc. So the push from the present was really about how do you transition from a 2-decade career? What do you do? Like, you know, how do you transform from burnout and extraction to something different? The pull from the future was then um, a feeling of not actually always running away from something, but more running towards something. And that something was an a way of being that just felt more regenerative. Regeneration sits on the opposite end of it. If you like frameworks and you draw a line, and on one end is extraction, the opposite end is regeneration. And that's what I like about it, because I like frameworks. And as a strategist, I'm always seeing in drawings and pictures and drawing on the walls. And I liked the idea of moving from extraction towards regeneration, both in how I approach my work and how I approach my personal life. And so the journey was one of shifting from extraction to regeneration at a personal level. Along the way, I figured out how we can do that as corporations and as business as well. And that's what I'm hoping to do now with Sporesight.
Thanks for elaborating on that. I think that's super helpful for my understanding of your work, and also for our audience, who often are people who find themselves in that same situation, um, maybe prior to that shift, but just feeling like I'm good at what I do, I can get paid well, I have opportunities, but it's not really filling me with joy, and I feel somewhat disconnected, and I feel kind of like I'm not in the right place and I need to do a shift. So I think you've presented a really wonderful example of how to go through that transition. And I'm curious, did you, when you started to incorporate these fungal principles and this new take on uh, regenerative thinking, and yes, let's dive more into that as we move on. But first, I wanted to find out: did you experience some resistance from coworkers or clients when you started to introduce these concepts, or how did you actually start to bring that into your work, and what was that like?
It's a, it's a great question. And I'm laughing because in the beginning, yeah, people were like, "Oh, you crazy mushroom girl. What are you doing?" You know? But it's really interesting since I think I was lucky in that my transition has coincided quite nicely with a number of other bigger cultural shifts that are at play in the world, um, and a general sort of. I think it has coincided with other things that have made my journey a little bit less weird for people, but certainly in the beginning. I had family members, colleagues, clients going, "Are you mad? What are you doing?" And I was like, "Yeah, maybe, but if it doesn't work, hopefully I can come back," you know? But I wanted to make sure that it would work so that I didn't come back. And a part of that, and I'm not going to try and make it sound as if this type of journey is easy. What 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 me and not just me, but there are many other people in the world doing this kind of work. What we're doing is essentially trying to shift perspectives from sort of accepting the status quo through to transformation. And that's not easy for people, it's not easy for organizations. It's much easier to take baby steps or to just not change at all. And part of this journey at a personal level, but as well as in the work, is helping to partly inspire by showing that it's possible by just doing it, but then also to help others come along by giving them the tools and practices to show them that it's not as hard as you think. So, for example, when working with clients, we often like one of the biggest questions that I've always had, particularly talking about regeneration and sustainability, is what's the business case for this? Particularly working with corporations, that's a classic question. And that question itself is almost rooted in this sort of one of the things that I think sits at the heart of the sustainability crisis, which is our perceived disconnection from nature as humans, or from, I'm going to use the word nature with a sort of caveat that, of course, we are nature. Um, so perhaps should rather say something like the web of life or the natural world, or, I think there's this human perception that we sit apart from the web of life, which underpins our tendency to dominate or disregard it and destroy it, which is crazy. I mean, it's bananas. It's our only home. And if we continue to extract and destroy, it just won't exist anymore. It's a very short-term view of the world. So, when we do have corporations or clients, approaching us with skepticism, that's fine. I think there too, you will find a kind of spectrum of people who are quite comfortable with the status quo, even with sustainability, incrementalism, etc.
Mm.
Perhaps they're comfortable with their extracted ways of working, and I feel that, those types of people, that's okay. Maybe we just won't have a conversation. There are more than enough people out there and organizations out there who are ready for new ways of working, for new ways of thinking, or even just to shift slightly into ways of working that are sort of a little bit more transformative. And so if someone ever does ask us, what is the business case for this, we turn it around and ask, well, what's the sustainability case of your business?
Mm.
Because you can't do business on a dead planet.
Yeah, good point. I think the thinking that you introduce is so crucial for reconnecting people with a vision for a regenerative economy. There's a lot of cynicism around green initiatives, greenwashing, sustainability, ESG initiatives, and it's often used as a way for companies to say, "Oh, but we're doing the green thing. We've got an ESG officer or something like that." So there's a lot of pretend to, rather than actually shifting the thinking. I think that such an important concept you introduce is this idea of rotting or composting what's there. And that's something, as a society, we don't really approach or talk about death or decomposition. And yet it's such an important part of nature that mushrooms teach us. I mean, in your book, you talk about how the ability for certain fungi to rot wood is essential for nature. Otherwise, the wood would just pile up, right? It would just keep building up this mass and kind of suffocate everything. You've got a keynote coming up, Fungi as a Futurist keynote, and that explores how fungi can help us reimagine how we think, work, and design futures. So it's very encompassing. Can you walk us through that idea in a bit more detail?
Um, sure thing. Thank you so much. I'm quite excited about this one. And we've recently, I say we, myself and 17 other partners have been working on something for quite some time. Um, and it is called Fungi as Your Futurist. As you say, it's kind of on the shelf behind you. Thank you so much. It's a playbook for imagining symbiotic futures, and we're transforming it into a keynote as well. And essentially, it's it's a short, impactful. It can be like a 20-minute keynote that is all about discovering how to think like fungi and how the intelligence of fungi and nature can help us work, think, and design better. So um, we start by questioning or introducing the idea of a new form of intelligence. that is not human intelligence. It's an intelligence that's bigger than us, that's doesn't belong to us, is much older than us, ancient, and probably, if we're honest, just knows quite a lot more than we do about themes like survival and resilience and transformation. And this is the intelligence of fungi. Of course, nature's intelligence in the field of biomimicry, for example, is a well-explored field. Uh, Sporesight in particular likes to learn from fungi because we just love mushrooms and for so many other reasons. But I think there's so much to learn. When you consult with fungi, it's like, wow, you can just get so inspired by how wise and genius it is. Um, and so this keynote aims to help us embrace fungal intelligence by first inviting you to rot what isn't serving, to just let go, to decay and compost, and then regenerates by being a little bit more or thinking a little bit more like a fungi. So the overarching framework that we've developed is called Rot and Regeneration. And it talks you through, within Rot and Regeneration, we talk through 12-ish, and I'll tell you why-ish in a minute, but 12-ish principles for how to gracefully let go what isn't serving, how to allow waste to become nourishment for what's next, and then how to regenerate, so how to create conditions for new life in ways that are not destructive, but are rather transformative. So I say 12-ish principles because nature is ever evolving and so are we. So there you go. There's your framework.
Yeah, just holding that for the listeners on audio, put the framework printed out there. That's
Thank you.
nice.
For those who'd like to see what Milan just held up on the screen, you can visit our website, which is sporesight.co. And the framework is up on a couple of pages. I think it's on the About page and the page Fungi/Futures, which is where we go more into this project and what it's all about. So we've got 12 principles. And Milan, you asked about rot. And the first part of being more like fungi or thinking more like fungi is to rot and decay. You mentioned trees piling up in the forest, and that's totally right. Without rot and mold, if fungi stopped eating like wood, dead trees would just pile up for kilometers. Nutrients would stay locked away, unavailable for new life. Juliana Ferci, one of my absolute heroes of the Fungi Foundation, is famous for saying rotten mold is the new rock and roll. And I and I love her and I totally agree with her. Like white rot fungi are such heroes. Maybe even the original anti-capitalists, because of how they sort of broke down and decided to start eating all the compressed trees from the Carboniferous period, where trees fell into swamps, fungi couldn't reach them over millions of years. This compression actually turned those old trees into coal, the original sort of fossil fuel, until white rot evolved and we're like, hey, actually, these guys sensed an accumulation of inactive resources over time. And they were like, we should deal with that. It's pretty cool. I am not a mycologist. I'm an amateur mycologist. I'm definitely not a scientist. So I don't want to butcher these types of concepts. But I think there's lots that we can learn from fungi in terms of decomposing what is no longer serving. What if we decompose to recompose?
It makes a lot of sense. And it's really interesting, when you apply that to capitalism as well. And, that's the economic framework we work within. I believe that, in the original way that it started out, before corporations became these ever-growing giants that just keep going and keep growing and keep consuming and tearing through resources. there was the idea that something would grow to a certain size, and then it becomes bankrupt, it fails, and all of the assets get, sold off and redistributed. And so it's kind of that rot and regeneration principle in the marketplace. And I think, um, you know, there's this too big to fail thinking, which is kind of prevents that. It's like, oh, this thing is so big, we have to just take money from somewhere else and keep this thing going, even though it's not really sustainable. We're not letting things rot and regenerate, even in our own lives. Um, what, you know, what does rot represent for you, or where could rot be applied? Um, do you have some examples, personal or
Mhm.
cultural, that you could share with us? That's something that wouldn't perhaps need to be composted in order for thriving to take place.
Totally. Um, well, firstly, just to say that I think these types of principles can be applied in so many ways. At Sporesight, when we're working with clients, we might apply them to an innovation or to a system or to a product or to a brand. But we also do workshops where we just work with people, like you do at Mycelium Hub, And I think that these concepts can apply to a habit or a mindset, um, or I don't know, problem with your colleague, or a way of working that is no longer serving. Um, in practice, how about an innovation that shouldn't be launched? As an anecdote, I in my career, I've worked with people whose teams have spent years and huge resources just trying to make an innovation work, mainly because somebody higher up thought it was a good idea. But it was a shit idea. Consumer insights and research said so. The sales and numbers said so. Everyone knew it, but that they really didn't let it go for years because of the sunk cost fallacy, or because we've come this far, in inverted commas, possibly because of ego. And in their case, that innovation just needed to, in this case, I would say it didn't need to rot. It probably needed to deliquesce, like like a shaggy ink cap. They just needed to gracefully let go and, you know, prioritize the ecosystem over the ego system, as I like to say.
Yeah.
So there's an example of, how things can rot. But I think also, as you mentioned, corporations can be quite resistant to this. The the rot idea sounds great in theory, but within the capitalist framework, um, how do we really champion letting go when our ideas of failure, that may be seen as failure, and that's not always so well received. And we get asked these types of questions a lot, like, it sounds great in theory, but how do you put that into practice? And one of the ways that we like to do that is to really just reframe how we see this. You can reframe rot as a resource liberation,
Hmm.
you know? It's not about killing a project, but it's about freeing up resources for something with more potential, more possibility. Just like mycelium, there's no energy that goes to waste on dead ends, but you can redirect nutrients to where growth is actually happening.
Thanks for giving us a bit more detail on those things. And one of the concepts that you introduce is the shift from ecosystem to ecosystem. And yeah, when we don't allow, when things persist, even that they shouldn't, it's kind of like a zombie. Like there's a lot of zombie things out there. They're like The Walking Dead. Like this should really be,
Yeah.
it's still like moving around and stuff because
Like meetings when we don't need meetings. Or like,
absolutely, absolutely. And that's where, intuition can perhaps also help. When you talk about these things, I see that you're also an educator and that you need to educate people on these perspectives, i.e., letting go of a project doesn't mean to be, it doesn't have to mean failure. I don't have to fear that process. And you've also created this distinction within rot of deliquesce. So this is like the liquidification annihilation. It just turns into liquid, like that ink cap mushroom, right? And then you've got the composting, which is more like, yes, we break down the entity and we see the resources that are freed up within that. So I think that's also
Yeah.
super useful.
Totally. And perhaps for your listeners who aren't familiar with the process of deliquescence, um, for anyone who's listening, go and have a YouTube of shaggy ink cap, the mushroom. Its Latin name is Coprinus comatus. It's well known by artists for its beautiful, rich black ink. You can literally paint with it because this little mushroom is so beautiful and has mastered the art of a graceful death. It's just so cool. It's a process called deliquescence. And when the conditions are right, this little mushroom shoots up, it spreads its spores, and then it just dissolves itself. It just melts away into the grass. It goes like just gone. And it gracefully lets go. Um, if you want, you can capture the ink and draw with it, which is super fun. But yeah, so we like to distinguish because yeah, deliquescence, I think some things need to just be let go of. And then other things can be composted, which is more about, the dismantle of that system or that habit or that process or product. Composting is more about dismantling it. How do you decay it to nourish something else?
That makes a lot of sense, and that really relates to a lot of the work that we do at Mycelium Hub when we work with individuals or groups, where the thing that is being composted might be the career or identity of who I am or how I create value in the world. And when that doesn't suit me, um, it's super helpful to take stock, and so we have a process of really going through like creating a compass of like, well, what is all contained within that identity? There are skills, there are resources, there are connections. Um, there's all kinds of possibilities when we actually let go of the container and look at what's in there and what could be created with that, right? And I'm curious now when it comes to the principles that you work with. Um, to the people that we work with are more like individuals, and I know that you've probably used some of those principles for your personal life and your approach to things. What are your favorite principles that are applicable in everyday life in a more hands-on way, um, that I could apply at home or at my community or at work as an individual? What are some of the ones that you like to work with?
Oh, great question. Well, I think the overall framework of rot and regeneration in general is fantastic for a personal life. I mean, my quite practical application of that was at first when I wanted to leave my career, I was like, deliquesce it, let it go, get rid, run away. But actually, that transformed into composting, where I was able to take, I, 20 years worth of skills and experience are worth something. So rather compost and take those as nutrients to now feed something new. So that's a sort of practical thing. But there are more principles. So of the 12, I think there are, I guess a good one is reciprocity or resource sharing. Um, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will probably be familiar with the mycelial network and how it is famous for the concept of the Wood Wide Web, um, which, by the way, is, of course, we know a sort of great romanticization. And I think we should also be careful using nature metaphors and make sure that they're site-specific and grounded in scientific specificity, and not over-romanticize nature. That is a sort of a side point. But the story of mycelium is fantastic because, or the Wood Wide Web, the story of kind of reciprocal giving and taking of nutrients and resources, I think is a well-known one. Um, what I like to what I like to do is to imagine how we can live like that practically day to day as humans. And it is a way that many people around the world still, it is a way in which many people around the world still live right now. I think growing up in Southern Africa, we were so lucky because it is generally a more sort of collectivist society where the concept of Ubuntu, for example, is pretty well known. But the idea of reciprocity in day-to-day life is just a kind of like ongoing dance of giving and taking between each other, between the natural world, and never seen as a transaction. It's never an I'm giving this to you because I expect the same in return. It's more a sort of practice of relational care. It's a
Mhm.
practice of interdependence that is just ongoing. Um, Kind of like Myces and termites in a mushroom farm in termite mounds. Um, and yeah, so I think mutualism or reciprocity is quite a nice one. And I believe at Mycelium Hub you work with that as well as sort of resource sharing. Am I right?
Yes, certainly. We like to apply that, and I think it shapes the way that we think and the way that we have conversations with people, and that those are the kind of interactions that we facilitate when we're working with individuals or groups. And it's really about kind of combining foresight strategy and this mutualism idea or resource sharing idea, where I could look at within a group, I could map and discuss what are the resources that we actually all have. And there's also what is our intention, what's the direction that we're going, and do we have a shared vision? And from there, we can explore what's possible, right? So we can look at, okay, well, if this is what we have between us, and we have this intention as a group, then let's look at what's possible there, and let's look at what are some scenarios that we can create as a group. And I think it's super important to have these. It's kind of, as an aside, having these conversations between people, to me, that's very mycelial as well. It's like seeing ourselves. I'm a spore. Um, we're all spores. We call our community members spores, and um, that comes from saying, well, like, how can we define what we have and who we are, and communicate that to each other, and to figure out what we can do together to explore those possibilities, as opposed to this conventional thinking, which is more like, well, when I hang out with my friends, we talk about sports or Netflix or, just random things. And work is work and work is over there. And that's what I do at the office. And to me, it's not so, let's blur those boundaries a little bit. Let's look ourselves in a holistic way. And that brings me to a term that you use a fair bit, and I think that's really, it kind of jumped out at me from the book and on your website, the more than human. And
Mm.
what is that more than human perspective? Are we talking about a superman, superwoman, super person, or what is more than human?
Great question. And I'm very, very excited by the evolution in academic research and practice that is going around on in the world right now by a number of organizations that are really like pushing and pioneering this thinking. One of them is the More Than Human Life program run by at New York University, the Institute for Natural Law, and a number of others. But essentially, more than human thinking essentially decenters humans. It challenges us to try and understand voices that we can't hear and to be the voice for things that can't speak. So that includes all of the voices of our multi-species neighbors and kin, the trees in your forest, the squirrels living in those trees, the fungi living in the ground around those trees. If you walk out into, I live in London, if I walk out I'm lucky to live near a pretty good park, and that park is filled with swans and trees and grass. And those are all some of the more than human beings that inhabit the city with me. So when we talk about more than human, what we're doing is essentially trying to design and design for and consider all of the other beings that share the space with us. And by honoring their voices, so to speak, I mean, of course, a tree can't speak in the same way that we speak. So I'm saying voices with a inverted commas. But this, by sort of honoring these viewpoints, we can start to stop considering humans as being at the top of this kind of hierarchy or a pyramid hierarchy, but rather as beings that live alongside other animals and plants and other non-living entities, and cognizant that our actions impact and reverberates with this complex and entangled world. Um,
Mm.
One of my goals with Sporesight is to shift design thinking from human-centered thinking to ecosystem-centered thinking, because everything that we do impacts an ecosystem. And one of the ways that we can do that is to partner with more than humans when we do research and design.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's so relevant to so many areas of life, and I'm thinking also of the recent clear cutting that we experienced around our property, and you can see trees behind us, but um, 5 hectares of them have been taken, and that highlighted that classic conflict that exists, right? Where it's like, oh, this is wood, I can sell it. We can make toilet paper or furniture. Um, but how does it impact the beings, the endangered species that have started to have a foothold in an 80-year-old forest? Or how does it impact what's happening under the ground? We don't consider that. And when I saw how they cut the trees and the ones that they left and the ones that they took, and there was no consideration for leaving spaces, leaving having shelter or having a shelter between the road and the forest. It was all in consideration of, okay, how can I take the most trees? How can I? A lot of trees were cut just for the machines to move around efficiently. You know, it's like, oh, we'll cut these just so we can staple the wood and move around and transport stuff. And it's completely from not just human, but from a commercial perspective. You know, there's so much educational work, and there's some writing and communication that we still need to do around that whole topic, addressing um, how that's dealt with, where there's also a lot of greenwashing or dishonesty um, based on the fact that the trees will be planted and they're going to grow back. So what are you worried about, right? But
Mm.
it resets the forest so much. There's so much that gets built up in terms of a web of um, an ecosystem and species that start to come when the forest matures. So
Yeah.
how can we balance the needs of commerce with the more than human perspective? You know, so I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. I mean, it's terribly complex, that forest of yours, and a really good example, I think. It's a tough one, and I think that slowly, through small acts of change and small practices, there are ways of being that are different that can show that perhaps there are other ways to earn money from a forest rather than cutting it down. And one of my favorite case studies, and I think this is a lovely example of both reciprocity and reciprocity with the more than human world, is an example called The Song of the Cedars. Have you heard about it?
yeah.
It's okay, I'm going to give a short explanation, but of course, go look online. And it's one of many beautiful projects like this that are coming out in the world right now. But The Song of the Cedars is a track that is co-created by humans and a forest, specifically Los Cedros in Ecuador. It has support from a legal petition which was filed to kind of credit the forest as a co-author in the song. And it's fantastic. It is co-authored essentially by the forest, Los Cedros Cloud Forest, and by the artist Cosmo Sheldrake, and Robert McFarlane. And it's so cool. It essentially challenges the sort of anthropocentric copyright laws, where we feel that we are the only ones that should benefit from art. It also recognizes nature's agency in helping to create art. Um, it's like this bold move towards ecological authorship. And it's on Spotify, so you can go listen to it right now. It's a cool song, and proceeds from I can't remember off the top of my head now, but I feel as far as I understand, proceeds from any financial proceeds go towards conservation and sort of the forest itself as well. So the forest is honored and credited as a co-author, but also receives all of the same benefits as the human authors.
That's awesome. Actually, now that you bring it up, I believe Merlin Sheldrake mentioned that at All
Yeah.
Things Fungi. And
Yes, yes, it's his brother Cosmo who's the author. Yeah.
yeah,
And Merlin Sheldrake himself is one of the people behind the More Than Human Life program, one of many. There's a great group of academics, of indigenous leaders, of thinkers running that program. Yeah.
and I think, that's the kind of cultural and educational work that is so important to um, raising the awareness for this type of thinking. A forest could have rights. A forest could be a person that profits from
Mm.
the proceeds of some art or some music. And well, if corporations can be a person, why can't a forest or a river be, right? Like these are dead
Yeah.
things that we've breathed life into and given them rights as people. Like um, they're allowed to persist and keep going. So why not apply that to forests? I think that's a really good point.
Totally. And there are examples of companies that, like Faith in Nature, for example, in the UK, was the world's first company to appoint nature to its board of directors. So it recognizes nature's rights, it gives it a voice and a vote on the board. And they have a sort of annual impact report that shows what that actually looks like, because it sounds great in theory, but they've actually done the hard work of figuring out quite practically what that can look like, and how to implement it, and how it won't necessarily be a detriment to your bottom line. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a principle with the Sami indigenous population in Sweden, who, by the way, are very much struggling with industrialization and deforestation in their areas, and they really need some attention and some help to their cause. But my point here is when they meet, they sit in the meeting, they have empty chairs, and they have one for nature and also one for animals, so that those might be represented. So we're like, well, how does this impact the animals?
Like an interspecies council.
Yeah, you could call it that.
So cool, so cool.
Yeah. I mean, the indigenous, so many indigenous cultures have a lot to teach us, and they're ahead of us in that way of thinking. And um, I think that a lot of the work that you do really connects with that as well.
Mm.
When it comes to the forest, that you made a really good point, and that's also around um, coexisting in capitalism. Like, how do you have sustainable growth? Let's just say. And one of the examples here with the clear cutting in Sweden that came up was chaga, right? That you can actually create, you can farm chaga in a forest where you can keep the forest growing and produce chaga, and you can actually, it's actually more profitable, right? It's actually stupid and idiotic from a capitalist perspective to clear cut a forest because there are a lot of amazing things. Fungal, you can harvest, you can have outdoor mushroom farms, or you can harvest chaga. Um, you can harvest pollen, all kinds of herbs and berries, and you can live with the forest and actually make more money than if you clear cut it, right? So there's education to be done around that, just to say,
Mm.
because, you know, maybe it's unfortunate, but it's difficult to say to people, oh, it's an ecosystem and it has value in its own right. This more than human perspective, it's still new to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're actually at All Things Fungi. We had um, the chaga extract that Peter created for us. So he took our raw chaga that we harvested, and we're very happy to have that and to be able to share that with people, to also symbolize that, you know, so this is the principle and application. Here's something that the forest can produce, if you let it be, if you let it grow, you don't cut it down, and you can actually produce an amazing health product. Well, this one is processed with koji, which is one of Peter's specialties.
Peter from Mycosymbiotics Europe.
That's right,
Yeah,
Peter
amazing.
from
Yeah.
Mycosymbiotics. And
Well, I've been taking your chaga every day, and I'm just going to give you a little plug. It's great.
awesome, thank you.
Thank you. But I think I love that example, Milan, because I think what you do there is you've circled back to another fungi principle, which speaks to resilience and can be applied again in our personal lives or to organizations or even to, so just long-term survival as humans. And the principle that another principle that we have on our rot and regeneration framework is long-termism.
Mm,
And I'm going to explain it. You've given such a lovely practical example of how long-term thinking can benefit us financially within the capitalist structure, and also not harm the forest. And I think that is such a great example of um, being quite fungal. Fungi are these ancient beings. They have, 400 plus million years of survival and adaptation. They carry this deep evolutionary knowledge. They have lived long before humans and will probably live a lot longer than us. And they've done this. They've embraced this long-term way of being by taking their time. And this is something that I think we can really start to think about applying just in our day-to-day lives and in our careers and jobs and the way we do projects. Um, I'm going to, I love explaining this by through a short story. And I don't know how much time we have left, but so I won't take too long with the
much
story.
time as you need, Jess.
Okay. Well,
Right.
I just love the story of a black yeast called, and I'm going to butcher the Latin name, but it's called Orobasidium pullulans. It's a black yeast, often used like in biological control of plant diseases, particularly in plant storage. And A. pullulans has an extremely slow growth rate. Like this yeast it sort of plods along in life as if it was born in the south of Spain and has all the time in the world. But what it loses in pace or lacks in pace, it makes up for in having this total like badass resistance to everything. This yeast cannot die. Throw whatever you want at Orobasidium pullulans and it will prevail. And it does this because it spends its energy first on defense, not on growth.
Mm,
It prioritizes resilience over growth and speed. And because of this, it's extremely successful. Now, imagine if we actually applied that to organizations. In every company that I've worked in, have just witnessed this exponential turnover of people because people get burnt out and leave, or disenfranchised or disenchanted and leave. That's not sustainable. Companies are coming and going. And I think it's largely because we're also just going so fast and trying to pile on this eternal growth. But what if we learned from the intelligence of nature and took infinite time with finite energy? Imagine if, like,
mm,
in redesigning your next project, you designed for 10 years, not 10 weeks. Imagine if every decision that we made in business or in our personal lives was also thinking about generation 4, your great, great, great grandchildren. Like, imagine if the biggest KPI we had as a key performance indicator to measure success in your work. Imagine if that KPI was endurance rather than size, for example. This type of thinking has also been referred to as cathedral thinking. I'm not sure if you've heard that concept.
I've heard it in the cathedral versus bazaar when it comes to designing software, but I don't know which version of the cathedral metaphor you're thinking.
Oh, I don't know this one. We'll have to, you'll have to tell me later. But no, I mean, this is really just essentially the idea that people who designed cathedrals often never set foot inside the finished cathedral, and they knew that going into it
Ah,
because it took
yeah.
so long, 100+ years to build a cathedral. And those cathedrals are still standing strong all over Europe right now. Um, and so, this idea of long-termism is something that I think is a great principle of fungi that we can use to measure our own success. Can we measure success not by how big our system is, but rather how alive it is?
Hmm. Yeah, that's really good. I think about that a lot actually, and thanks for bringing that up. Just how different to the way that we live our lives that approach is of saying, I'm going to build, I'm going to work on this thing that my father worked on, my grandfather worked on, my children will work on, and somewhere down the line, someone's going to see the finished outcome, right? That's incredible. Um, when it comes to long termism and you have adaptability, there's also this anti-fragility idea, which is kind of related but not the same thing, and which really relates to disruptions allowing what it is to improve. So it's like something breaks, and then when it rebuilds, it's actually stronger than before. Um, but that's also more of a long-term perspective on things. Um, I wanted to go a little bit more into All Things Fungi Festival that
Mm.
we all attended to with a big crew. That was a lot of fun, and Marcia and myself came to UK and joined you there at Andrew's place. Um, so at the festival, what did you observe there around the rot and regeneration happening in broader culture? Do you see this as a place of reflection and renewal, or what was your observation from that festival?
I think this isn't from the festival itself, but broader culture more.
Mhm.
Um, I do feel as if, um, it's no secret that mushrooms are having a moment and have been having a moment in culture for some time. And there's a reason for that. Um, I love I'm always reminded by a quote by journalist and author Doug Behrend, who wrote a really cool book called In Search of Mycotopia. Um, and he talks about how part of the reason why fungi and mushrooms are becoming so popular is because they represent new ways of thinking that allow us to subvert an unsustainable status quo. And I think all things fungi is reflective of this. The fact that a mushroom festival can exist in the first place, can pop up and in 3 years kind of treble in size and bring together such a cool bunch of people who are subverting the status quo in so many different ways, whether it's challenging how we think about innovation as and collating all these fantastic fungi innovation ideas like Mark Violo and the team at Microstories, or whether it's all of the fantastic producers of mushrooms, cultivating growers. All things fungi just brings together people from so many different worlds, from art and design to cultivation to psychedelic medicine to plant medicine to innovation. And every one of them, I feel, is united a um,
Mm.
in a sort of goal or mission to compost the status quo and to do differently. And this year we had some stickers, actually. I printed some stickers to have a bit of fun with, and one of them said decompose to recompose. I think another one was compost the status quo. And the fact that every single person who I gifted a sticker to at the festival had a face that lit up like a Christmas tree, and they were like, yes, this is it. I love this. This is what we have to do. There's kind of like this movement of that is ground up by citizens and scientists and thinkers and artists and people just doing things. It's a movement of sovereignty, and I find that so super exciting.
Thanks for sharing your perspective on that. I really get that. Yeah, it's like a representation of a shift, right? It's like this mushroom pops up. The festival is like a mushroom showing itself, where we can see something's going on. People are looking for a new perspective.
Mm.
And what really got me in a kind of similar to your take is like there are people who have um, a lot of like let's say mana or status in the movement, or who've done really interesting work, and you can just connect and approach anyone there, and it's just so easy to approach people and find out what they're doing, and maybe create the foundations for a collaboration or something like that. You have people like Merlin Sheldrake, who's done fantastic work, and probably published one of the books that has done the most for the movement, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I annoyingly didn't bring either of my 2 copies of Entangled Life because I didn't know that Merlin would be at the festival because I didn't do enough homework, which is silly of me. There you go. There's your copy. I've got mine.
Entangled Life,
I got 2, but I've got one right here.
yeah.
Um, I
Yes.
actually very sheepishly um, approached Merlin with a copy of Fungi as Your Futurist and apologized for not having my copies of Entangled Life for him to sign, but gave him a signed copy of Fungi as Your Futurist. So I hope he's enjoying the thinking, because a lot of Merlin's thinking very much inspired Sporesight's thinking, as did the thinking of so many other amazing mycologists and scientists and just people doing cool stuff. And that's what I think is cool about um, movements like the All Things Fungi Festival, the
Mm.
Mycelium Hub pop-up that the three of you had throughout September in the UK was another example of that, where um, you know, people from so many different walks of life converged in a space in a very organic way over the course of a month or so to bring a whole bunch of really cool ideas together. Um, Different industry, different life experiences, and different perspectives, but all with a similar goal to just think differently and live in more regenerative ways. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the space there, and I remember that session at the breakfast table where you introduced your thinking and got us all to comment and reflect on um, what are you doing with Sporesight, and how to um, bring your work to the festival, and how you connect with people through there. So it was really, yeah, it was really inspired and collaborative. And I think there is something in this movement, if you want to call it that, and there's a kind of a shared perspective. And I think we've discussed it too in our personal conversations, when we were hanging out, of like there's a mycelial way of being, that person's not very mycelial. They're more like, oh, I'm here to make some money. But
Mhm.
there are others that are just there because they're driven from purpose, and they see something important, and they want to engage, and they want to connect with others also, and they don't engage with others from ego. They're like, hello, fellow Spore, like what can we share? You know, how can we engage? And I
Absolutely.
think we really had that spirit at the house, and Andrew did a great job of holding that space too, to credit him. Um, Now, going into collaboration, collaboration can be messy, as the process of decomposition often is. What have fungi taught you about sustaining healthy cooperation across different ecosystems of people? Because your work has really spans a lot of, yeah, independent researchers, people that are still part of a corporation, and everything in between.
Yeah, messy is a good word for it, and I love that because mulch is where magic happens, right? Um, um, yeah, I think, yeah, collaboration can be messy, you're right, and collaborating with different ecosystems of people can be, I think, incredibly challenging at times, but so rewarding when it's allowed to be messy. Um, I think there's something quite magical in bringing, as you were talking about, bringing people with different perspectives together, and that's something that we do at Sporesight, where um, our work sits at this strange intersection of inspiration and advocacy and education, but also impact. You know, we want to actually
Hmm.
really make a difference as well from it in a tangible way. So we do regenerative design consultancy and foresight and insight and design research. And those are all worlds that are coinciding in various ways, but then also intersecting with ecology and biology and ecosystems in quite site-specific ways. And we are trying to figure out how to make this all happen. And it's an evolving process. It's messy because I think a lot of the time, what we're really trying to do is shift from, um, as we were talking earlier, these kind of purely anthropocentric or human-centric ways of designing to bigger ecosystem-centric ways of designing and thinking, which means we don't do consumer insight, we do entangled insight. Or we don't do user experience, we do more than human experience research. But it all sounds great in practice, but what does that look like in theory? You know, sorry, in theory, but in practice,
Mm.
that can be very messy. And we are actually in the process of kind of decomposing research practices in order to create new types of research practices at the intersect of all those types of um, people. And we have to be collaborative in it. We have to be mycelial in the way that we do it because um, partly we can't just come along and say, well, human-centered design isn't the way to do it, because of course it is the way to do it. It's not about breaking something down purely for the sake of breaking it down, but it's about thinking, how do we take those aspects, collaborate with the right types of people, cooperate together in reciprocity, in a dance of give and take in terms of a research practice, and then reconstruct it um, in new ways. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but but I think the just the idea of collaborating um, within an ecosystem
Mm.
essentially means being open to a reciprocal dance and take, and being open to where that might take you if it wasn't your intended original path.
I get that. I guess what I was asking was around, do you have any kind of rituals or kind of communication, like you start a new collaboration, and then you have some communication around, here are some principles I'd like to use when we're working together to convey what you've just shared with me. For example, I think applying long termism to the way that you're collaborating, I don't think it would be helpful to have tight deadlines of like, oh, we've got to have this done by the 1st of
Mm.
December, because we're figuring things out, and we're creating relationships, and we're creating exploring possibilities, and things grow at their own pace. But I think that's something that would need to be communicated to some people who might have expectations of like, I need to have this done this quarter. And
Yeah.
I bring it up too because we're launching Spore Society, which is going to be a membership offering to work more closely with people who are defining their own path, similar to the way that you've done. Um, and we've played with deadlines there as well. But now we're realizing, okay, we need to cook and we need to compost and we need to build this thing. And when it's right, we'll launch it. Because having a deadline, you end up rushing, you end up stressing, and you might end up with something that's not quite right, that doesn't have the quality, even though you met the metrics, right? But yeah, do you have some kind of communication process when you're collaborating with people to kind of create a shared understanding or explore what the shared understanding is?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a few sort of practices, and I'm saying we, of course, Sporesight is very small. Sporesight is myself and a Grace who helps me with. She's a research associate who helps me with all sorts of things. She's great. And then, of course, on a project basis, we are collaborating with external partners, and we have quite a wide network. And then some preferred partners who we work with on a more regular basis. Um, I think, each project would have a slightly different practice, but some common practices um, within Sporesight overall are regular rot and regeneration sessions on our, Sporesight itself as an entity. In fact, I did one just last week where I decided to rot a whole part of the business because, well, for many reasons, but we just did away with it. Maybe it can compost for another part, for another time, but it's not serving right now. So, we rot and regenerate bits of the business on a regular basis. But in terms of just sort of practical, like, what could I do tomorrow with my team and communicate? Um, with every project, we like to start by just asking the question, how would nature approach this? How would nature solve this? And could nature or fungi, um, you know, would they do it differently?
Mhm.
There are some cool um, practices like not even as a joke, but quite literally every time I'm stuck on a problem or a solution or a communication challenge, I might just stop and ask, what would fungi do?
Mhm.
And
Sure.
and that's quite a good thought exercise or question practice to
Mm.
incorporate into your work as an actual consulting question. This network that has survived 400 odd million years, how would it approach this problem?
Mm.
Uh, and if it is a collaboration or a communication issue, how would fungi approach it?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so that really does answer the questions. As like you have, from your perspective, you can ask certain questions that will then start a dialogue, to perhaps shift thinking or show a new way of looking at things. Um, yeah, that makes sense. The um, One of the questions that I still had, and I want to give you a chance to talk a bit more about what you do before we wrap up. But before we get there, I just wanted to find out, when it comes to the people that we're addressing, our community and our future members, these are people in the mid-career, that are redefining what success looks like for them, that have reached a certain point and they now feel like this isn't me. Um, they want to find an alignment between purpose and livelihood and not just feel like, oh, I'm doing this to pay the bills, but like I want to do something that fully expresses who I am deep within. What insights from your work would you share with someone in that stage of the transition? Or what's perhaps a small mycelial action that they can take today to start designing a more regenerative future for themselves?
Well, if they like, they can book a Rot Regeneration session with us. Because then that would be super fun. We'd
Yeah.
love to work together. No, but on a serious note, I think it's such a common place to be, isn't it? And I deeply empathize with people in that position and have many colleagues and peers who are in it. And um, I guess I guess a sort of easy place to start is to just ask a question of yourself, um, and be quite honest. You know, start to identify perhaps one thing that needs to rot. Whether that is your whole career, it doesn't have to be the whole career. That can be quite a tough transformation for people. But
Mm,
could it be a habit that's draining, or a process that everyone complains about,
mm,
or a project that's on life support? Just ask what needs to rot, and then write it down, and then ask, well, should it deliquesce? Should we let it gracefully die completely, just dissolve it? Or do we dismantle it with intention and try to turn it into nutrients for what's next? And I think that is really the key, is then to not just do this thought exercise, but be bold and actually act on that.
You see, to me, that really brings up, and thanks for laying it out so clearly. That really connects with the idea of sovereignty, that we have sovereign living or mycelial sovereignty that we work with, which is really, it's just the simple realization I have a choice. I'm not a victim. I have agency. I can choose. Maybe I can't choose who's in power or what, they are doing or what corporations are up to, but I can choose how I spend my time. I can choose, yeah, my habits. I can choose who I spend my time with or what I think about, right? So, and then do I still need to do that? So then that's where the rot comes in. So I really like that.
I loved what you said there, Milan. Sorry to interrupt, but I loved what you said there about agency, because in exploring futures and foresights and futures thinking, you often come across that feeling of powerlessness that you've described, where people feel as if they're a victim of their circumstances. And of course, it can be quite disempowering when imagining a transformation of society, politics, organizations, etc. It can feel very daunting and very difficult. And often in our research, we do a bit of a before and after exercise where we try and understand how people relate to their futures. And that could be how they feel about shaping or impacting their own future personally, or the future of their company or organization. And we have a scale where we ask you to kind of, like a Likert scale from 0 to 9, where 0 is powerless
Mm,
and 9 is empowered. I feel empowered or have a sense of agency to shape or impact my future or that of my company or organization. And quite often there's a disconnect. People sometimes feel a little bit more agency over their own personal futures than they do their organizations. But still, the level is quite low. And this is why futures literacy is so important. The minute people are more aware of the fact that there are many possible versions of the future, and there are multiple preferable versions, and your preferable might be different to my preferable. And there are multiple plausible versions of the future, like futures that could happen or probably will happen because of the factors that are going on today. Once you start to understand all the different versions of the future that are probably going to happen, you realize that there are ways to work towards creating or shaping those futures.
mm,
And there's a process called reperception, which I think it was a term coined by a guy called Pierre Wack, who is a systems thinker, a foresight thinker. And reperception is essentially that moment where somebody realizes, there are different futures and I can shape them. And that is such a powerful thing to happen as an individual. And that had to happen for me to be able to make change in my own life. And one of the ambitions of Foresight is to empower the people that we work with to make change in their worlds, whether that is your personal life or your organization.
That's a powerful message. I have the ability to shape my future. I can imagine and choose a future, and I think it's a message that's more relevant than ever, Jess. Actually, in a time where people feel overwhelmed and disempowered by everything that's going on and the pace of change. So, um, and speaking of that, like with your work, who are you looking to work with now? Like, what are the ideal people that you want to connect with and that you want to share this work with? And where can they connect with you? Are you going to be, I mean, obviously online, or talk about some of your upcoming appearances where you're perhaps presenting? Um, how can they connect with you?
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, since we soft launched Sporesight in early 2025, we've been approached by so many phenomenal people from academia through to science and the arts. And then, of course, lots of strategy. But our core focus is in two places. Um, for inspiration, our work is we do speaking and inspiration, we do talks and workshops, and full day field trips, which is the best way to engage with rot and regeneration. You get out into the field, you meet mushrooms in the woods. It's an in-person experience in nature where you are immersed in nature-centric thinking. And that's fantastic. And this is for anybody who is curious about symbiotic futures. It's for people working in speculative design, in imagination work, in systems design, in innovation. This is the inspiration work that we do is designed to sort of inspire just, fresh thinking. And then for the impact, our consultancy is specifically for people working in sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So if you're a CSR director, for example, who is looking to shift from pure sustainability to more regenerative practices or initiatives or programs, we work with people like that. Um, we work with visionary founders who see business as a force for good, uh, B Corps, for example. But then also a lot of the people that we work with are actually consultancies like Sporesight, who we partner with on other programs. So consultancies who are working in sustainability, in foresight, and in innovation. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways to engage, but mainly I think Fungi as Your Futurist is launching as a bit of a keynote talk. So your listeners will be able to hopefully see that out in the world in many different forms in the next few months and years. Uh,
Awesome.
and on our website, which is sporesight.co, you can find all of the ways to engage with us and yeah, book a session, come into the field with us on a field trip, or just, book a call with me to chat about and geek about fungi.
That's great. And I think that you're very easy to talk to, very easy to connect with, that, you have all this knowledge around foresight and from years of research. And the way that you present your work is very polished. I love your presentations and your papers and the book itself. It's really well presented and easy to digest. So I think anyone who gets in touch will find it very easy to connect and explore collaboration. Is there anything else that you want to share after all of the things that we've discussed before we wrap up the podcast?
Um, no, I guess I would just like to thank you and your listeners for being so much like fungi. We're on a mission to invite people to think more like fungi, and I think the Mycelium Hub really embodies that and is such a great example of mycelial thinking in practice and leading the way and pioneering the way. So if we can, if our two organizations can think like fungi, I think anyone can.
Thank you so much. It's very kind. And thank you so much for your time today and allowing us to dive deeply into your world and your perspective. And it's been a pleasure to connect and interact on multiple levels and, to hang out in person. I look forward to future collaborations and wish you a lot of success with this very important work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.